They sent cops to scare me, but froze when the officer who opened the door was my wife. The evening light had dimmed to a bruised purple when the first knock came. It wasn't the polite kind that neighbors used. It was heavy, deliberate, and echoed through the wooden beams of Mark Thompson's front porch. He froze mid-step, a coffee mug in hand, the aroma of roasted beans still swirling through the air. Outside, through the frosted glass, the shape of a patrol cruiser's flashing lights pulsed red and blue against the darkening trees. He sighed, of course. The HOA. For the past 3 weeks, Mark had been the target of their endless harassment, warning letters about the unauthorized dwelling modification on his own property, threats of fines for non-compliant exterior paint. And now this. They'd actually sent the police. He placed the mug down on the counter, straightened his flannel shirt, and muttered, "They really did it. They actually called the cops." The knock came again, sharper this time. Mark opened the door slowly. 2 uniformed officers stood at the porch, hands resting on their belts. Behind them, in the glow of the cruiser lights, Karen Whitfield, head of the Evergreen Lakes HOA, loomed with her clipboard like a queen surveying her court. Her lips were pressed tight with triumph. "Evening, sir," the taller officer said, clearing his throat. "We received a complaint from the Homeowners Association about a violation. Are you Mark Thompson?" Mark's jaw tensed. "Yeah, this is my house." Karen stepped forward. "Property," she corrected sharply. "And it's under the governance of the Evergreen Lakes HOA. This man has ignored multiple compliance warnings and—" But she stopped mid-sentence. Because just then, from the hallway behind Mark, came the sound of a door opening, boots on tile, the low creak of a utility belt. Officer Jenna Thompson stepped into view, Mark's wife. Still wearing her department uniform, badge gleaming under the porch light. Every head turned as she moved beside Mark, calm and composed, her hand resting casually on her duty belt. "Good evening, officers," she said evenly. "Problem." The 2 cops froze for half a heartbeat, then straightened instinctively. Recognition flickered across their faces. Officer Thompson," one of them said, "we didn't realize that this address was mine," she finished for him, her tone cool but commanding. "Or that the non-compliant homeowner you were sent to intimidate is my husband." Karen blinked rapidly, her composure cracking. "Wait, I didn't know you live here." Jenna's gaze turned to her like a blade sliding from its sheath. "You've been filing complaints against my husband for weeks, haven't you, Ms. Whitfield? Harassment under the guise of code enforcement. And now you're using law enforcement resources to enforce HOA policy." Karen's mouth opened, then closed. Her clipboard trembled slightly in her hands. "Officers," Jenna continued, stepping forward, "this is a civil matter. There is no criminal violation here. The HOA has no jurisdiction to call you to a private residence for code enforcement. You can log this as a false report." The shorter officer shifted uncomfortably. "Understood, ma'am. We'll note that." "Good," Jenna said, folding her arms. "Then you can tell your dispatcher Evergreen Lakes HOA is misusing emergency services again." The color drained from Karen's face. "Again?" she echoed weakly. Mark couldn't help it. The corner of his mouth twitched into a smirk. Jenna turned back to him, her voice softening. "You okay?" "Better now," he murmured. Then, louder, "Guess that answers who's really in charge around here." The officers exchanged quick glances, nodded politely to Jenna, and headed back toward the cruiser. Karen stood frozen on the sidewalk, her clipboard clutched to her chest, her empire of petty power cracking under the weight of real authority. As the patrol car pulled away, Jenna shut the door and exhaled. Mark turned to her with a wry smile. "Well, that was one way to make an impression." She smirked back, unpinning her badge and setting it on the entry table. "They wanted the law involved," she said, her tone like quiet thunder. "Now they'll get it." Outside, the last traces of sunset faded behind the evergreens, and for the first time in weeks, Mark felt the air shift. Something had changed tonight, and the HOA had just declared war on the wrong couple. The next morning, Mark shuffled through the pile of mail stacked on the kitchen counter. Most of it was junk, credit card offers, flyers for lawn care, and one pastel envelope that looked almost friendly. But the logo in the top corner made his stomach tighten. Evergreen Lakes Homeowners Association. He sighed and tore it open. Inside was a crisp white letter, written in a tone that could only belong to Corinne Miller, HOA president, self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac. Dear Mr. Thompson, you have been found in violation of Article 7, Section B of the Evergreen Lakes Community Standards. Unauthorized tree trimming on the property located at 42 Evergreen Trail has resulted in damage to common aesthetic value. A fine of $450 has been issued, due within 10 business days. Failure to comply may result in escalation to property lien proceedings. Sincerely, Corinne Miller, President, Evergreen Lakes HOA. Mark blinked at the number, reading it twice. $450 for cutting his own damn branches. He looked out the window at the maple tree in question. One branch, maybe two, had brushed against the roof last week, so he'd trimmed them. The cut was clean, professional, nothing wrong with it. He walked into the living room and found Jenna lacing her boots before heading to her shift. "Babe," he said, holding up the paper, "tell me this isn't real." She scanned the letter, lips tightening. "Corinne again." "Yeah, for tree trimming. She's lost it." Jenna shook her head. "You know she's been gunning for us since the siding dispute. She probably has your house flagged on her little clipboard." Mark groaned. "What siding dispute? She told me to repaint because it did match the neighborhood aesthetic. You remember that. I matched it exactly to the color code." "Corinne doesn't care about rules," Jenna said. "She cares about control." After she left for work, Mark sat down at his laptop, determined to see how bad this had gotten. He logged into the HOA portal, something he hadn't done in months, and was immediately greeted by a red banner. Outstanding violations, 5. He clicked. Unauthorized tree trimming, $450. Improper garbage bin placement, $75. Driveway oil stain, $100. Holiday lights displayed past seasonal window, $50. Lawn maintenance noncompliance, $125. His pulse quickened. What the hell? He scrolled through the details. The garbage bin complaint, dated the morning after pickup day. The oil stain, it was from when the moving truck parked for an hour. The holiday lights, 2 days after New Year's, hardly a crime. Mark slammed the laptop shut. This wasn't negligence, it was targeting. That evening he printed every notice, every so-called violation, and laid them across the dining table. The pile looked absurd, nearly 24 pages of nonsense, all signed by Corinne Miller. He pulled out his phone and began filming a video for documentation. Corinne Miller, president of Evergreen Lakes HOA, has issued over $800 in fines for things that don't exist, he narrated, zooming in on the evidence. This isn't management, it's harassment. When Jenna came home, she found him still surrounded by papers. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "I found something else she's charging interest." "Interest?" Jenna echoed. He turned the letter toward her. 5% per week. That's loan shark math, not HOA math. Jenna's jaw tightened. "You need to contest this officially. Go through the county property office, not her board." Mark nodded, already planning on it. But deep down, a knot of unease was forming. He'd seen Corinne's type before, people who thrived on intimidation, who'd rather create chaos than admit fault. And he knew that if he didn't push back now, she'd just keep going. He gathered the letters, slipped them into a folder, and wrote across the top in bold marker, "Evidence Karen Miller." The war hadn't officially started yet, but it was coming. Saturday morning began quietly, sunlight dripping through the blinds, the hum of sprinklers in the distance, and the faint scent of coffee drifting through the kitchen. Mark was halfway through his second cup when the sound of snapping shutters made him look up. At first he thought it was a bird, but then he saw her. Karen Miller stood at the edge of the front lawn, wearing her usual pastel cardigan and oversized sunglasses, clutching a clipboard like it was a weapon. Her phone was up, click, 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 as she photographed his driveway mailbox, even the flower bed Jenna planted last spring. Mark stepped outside, forcing a polite tone. "Morning, Karen. Can I help you with something?" Karen didn't look up, just documenting further violations. "Violations," Mark's jaw clenched. "You're standing on my lawn." "Correction," she said, tapping her clipboard. "I'm on community-maintained frontage, which means it falls under HOA jurisdiction." He took a slow step forward. "Karen, that patch of grass you're standing on is 10 feet inside my deed line. I measured it myself when I put in the sprinkler system." She finally lowered her sunglasses, her eyes flashing like a hawk that spotted prey. "Is that a threat, Mr. Thompson?" Mark let out a laugh of disbelief. "No, it's a boundary. You might want to learn what that means." Jenna's cruiser pulled into the driveway just then. She'd gotten off shift early, her uniform still crisp, badge gleaming in the sun. Karen turned at the sound, stiffened, and for a moment her confident posture faltered. "Everything okay here?" Jenna asked, stepping out, eyes narrowing. Karen recovered fast. "Ah, Officer Thompson, just doing a quick inspection. Your husband has accumulated several new violations this week." Mark barked a laugh. "New ones? What now?" Breathing too loud. Karen ignored him. "I'm afraid being married to law enforcement doesn't exempt you from community standards, dear," she said sweetly to Jenna. "Badge or not, HOA rules apply to everyone." The condescension in her tone was razor-sharp. Jenna folded her arms, her voice calm but edged. "And trespassing laws apply to everyone too, Mrs. Miller. You're standing on private property." Karen's smile tightened. "As I told your husband, this section is under HOA easement." "Funny," Jenna said, tilting her head. "Because I just came from a shift where we arrested someone for exactly that kind of excuse. Would you like me to radio dispatch and confirm property boundaries?" Karen's face drained of color. "That won't be necessary." "Good," Jenna said, taking a deliberate step closer. "Then I suggest you step off our lawn and stop photographing our home without permission." Karen hesitated, then smoothed her cardigan, retreating 2 slow steps toward the sidewalk. "You'll be hearing from the board," she said icily. "We don't take kindly to hostility in our community." Jenna smiled thinly. "Neither do we." When Karen finally walked away, Mark let out a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "She's completely unhinged," he muttered. Jenna picked up Karen's dropped flyer from the ground. It was an HOA bulletin about community decorum and enforcement policy updates. At the bottom, in bold print, was a new line. "Effective immediately. HOA officers may conduct visual property inspections as necessary to uphold standards." "Visual inspections," Jenna repeated, her tone dark. "That's her excuse to stalk people." Mark rubbed his temples. "She's escalating. She's not just fining us now, she's trying to scare us." Jenna placed a hand on his arm. "Then we don't play defense anymore. We go on record." That night, Mark installed a small security camera on the porch and another over the driveway. He angled one directly toward the street, just in case Karen decided to come back. The next morning she did. Through the live feed, Mark watched as Karen stopped across the street, phone in hand again. But this time, when the red light on the camera blinked, she froze, caught in her own game. Mark smiled grimly. "Smile for the footage, Karen." He saved the recording to his evidence folder, right next to the letters, photos, and fines. Because now it wasn't just a dispute. It was war. The next few days were tense, the kind of quiet that hums just before a storm. Every time Mark pulled into the driveway, he half expected to find another envelope taped to the door, another notice, another fine. But what awaited them on Wednesday evening wasn't a letter. It was a breaking point. Jenna came home with a folder tucked under her arm, the kind of folder she usually carried for official casework. Her expression was sharp, focused. "Mark," she said, tossing her keys onto the counter, "I did some digging." He looked up from the table, where a stack of HOA letters sat in a messy pile. "On Karen." "On the HOA," Jenna corrected. She spread the folder open. "State law says homeowners, associations have to file annexation documents with both the county and the state land registry whenever they expand boundaries. I called the records office today." Mark leaned forward and she smiled, the kind of smile that meant she'd found something good. "They couldn't find one for our address. Not one. According to every document on file, Evergreen Lakes HOA ends 2 lots before our property line." Mark blinked. "You're serious?" "Dead serious, which means—" "We were never part of the HOA," he finished, realization hitting like a thunderclap. Jenna nodded. "Exactly." For a moment, neither of them spoke. It was almost too much to process, after weeks of harassment, hundreds of dollars in bogus fines, and constant surveillance. The truth was so simple it felt surreal. Mark grabbed his laptop and opened the county GIS portal. "Let's make sure," he muttered, typing fast. The map loaded in shades of beige and green, tiny parcel lines crisscrossing the screen. He entered their address. There it was, Lot 42, Evergreen Trail. And sure enough, a thick red boundary line representing the HOA stopped at Lot 40. He zoomed in, then out, double-checking the legend. His lot was outside the zone, completely. Mark leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "You've got to be kidding me. She's been threatening liens and fines for a property she doesn't even have jurisdiction over." Jenna's tone hardened. "That's not just unethical, that's fraud." She flipped another page from her folder, a printed excerpt from the state homeowner law statute. She pointed at a highlighted line. "No homeowners association shall impose assessments, restrictions, or penalties upon properties not legally annexed or otherwise under its recorded jurisdiction." Mark exhaled slowly, his pulse steadying. "So all of this, the letters, the fines, the intimidation, none of it holds up in court." "Not only that," Jenna said, "if she's been collecting money from others outside the boundary, it's embezzlement. The county would have grounds to dissolve the HOA entirely." Mark's grin spread, the first genuine one in weeks. "You're telling me I might finally get my Saturday mornings back from this woman?" Jenna chuckled, though her eyes stayed serious. "Let's not celebrate just yet. Karen's the type to double down when cornered. We need proof, official proof." Mark nodded. "Then tomorrow, we go to the county office in person. I want every document, every plat map, every signature that proves this house isn't under her thumb." Jenna tapped the folder. "Already requested copies. They'll be ready for pickup in the morning." As the evening settled in, they sat at the table, surrounded by papers, laptops, and printouts. The atmosphere wasn't angry anymore, it was strategic. Mark highlighted their property line, printed the map, and pinned it to the corkboard beside the fridge. Beneath it, he wrote in black marker, "Not HOA property." It felt like drawing a battle line. Before heading to bed, Jenna placed her hand on his shoulder. "You know what this means, right? Once we show her the truth, she won't back down quietly." Mark looked at the board one last time, the red boundary line stopping neatly before their home. "Then she'll hit the wall she built herself," he said, "and I'll be standing on the right side of it." Outside, a motion light flicked on. Through the curtain, Mark saw Corinne's silhouette walking past again, clipboard in hand, still patrolling, still deluded. He smiled faintly. "Enjoy your little kingdom, Corinne," he murmured, "because tomorrow I'm tearing down your throne." By the following Friday, word had spread through Evergreen Lakes that Mark and Jenna were causing trouble. Neighbors who used to wave now averted their eyes. A few even whispered behind hedges when Mark walked his dog. Corinne's influence ran deep, the kind that turned friendly faces into silent observers. That evening, Mark was in the garage sorting through paperwork for the county visit when he heard the unmistakable sound of police sirens approaching. Not racing, but deliberate, a slow, official arrival. He froze, then stepped outside. Two patrol cruisers rolled up in front of his driveway, lights flashing in the dusk. Out stepped a pair of uniformed officers, one older, one clearly fresh out of training. The older one adjusted his cap and called out, "Mr. Thompson." Mark's pulse quickened. "That's me, what's going on?" The officer glanced down at his tablet. "We received a complaint from Evergreen Lakes Homeowners Association. Something about a non-compliance disturbance and alleged harassment of an HOA official." Mark's jaw tightened. "Corinne." Before he could respond, a voice rang out from across the street. "That's him. He's been verbally abusive and obstructing enforcement actions." Corinne was standing there, phone in hand, filming everything. Her pastel cardigan fluttered in the breeze, and her smile was tight, triumphant. Mark let out a breath through his nose. "She's unbelievable." The younger officer looked uneasy. "Ma'am, please stay on the sidewalk while we talk to Mr. Thompson." But Corinne kept filming. "You'll see, officers, this man has been hostile for weeks. We have a zero-tolerance policy for noncompliance." Before Mark could even open his mouth to defend himself, the sound of a car door slamming broke the tension. Jenna stepped out of her SUV, still in full police uniform. The moment the officers saw the badge on her chest, their posture changed instantly. "Evening," Jenna said coolly, approaching. "Everything all right here?" The older officer cleared his throat. Officer Thompson, we didn't realize." "Yeah," she said, her tone sharp. "You're responding to my address. Care to tell me why?" Corinne blinked, lowering her phone slightly. "This isn't about you, dear. It's about your husband." Jenna turned her gaze on Corinne, and the temperature in the air seemed to drop. "You filed a police report claiming a disturbance." Corinne hesitated. "As president of this community, I have the right to enforce." "Not by abusing emergency services," Jenna cut in. "You filed a false report, again." The senior officer shifted awkwardly. "Ma'am, this seems to be a civil matter, not criminal. HOA disputes don't fall under police jurisdiction." Jenna nodded. "Correct, which is why this report is going to internal review. You've got 2 squad cars here wasting taxpayer time because someone didn't like being told no." Mark folded his arms. "You want to see what she calls noncompliance? Come inside, I'll show you the county maps. Our property isn't even under her HOA." Corinne's face flushed crimson. "That's not possible, the association." Jenna interrupted again, her voice calm but laced with authority. "You've been trespassing, photographing private property, issuing fraudulent fines, and now you've filed a false police report. You should stop talking before this turns into something serious." Corinne's hand trembled slightly, the phone still pointed at them. I was just trying to maintain standards." "Standards don't include harassment," Jenna said flatly. The older officer nodded. "Ma'am, unless there's an actual disturbance, we're closing this call. I suggest you contact your legal counsel before making any further reports." Corinne's composure cracked. "You're making a mistake. I run this neighborhood." Mark couldn't help himself. "No, Corinne, you run a sinking ship." The officers exchanged a knowing glance before turning back to their cruisers. As they drove off, Corinne stood frozen on the sidewalk, her phone still recording, but her confidence was gone. Jenna stepped closer, her voice low enough only Corinne could hear. "Next time you use my department to play power games, I'll make sure it's your name on the report." Corinne turned and stormed away, muttering under her breath. Mark watched her retreat, a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction flooding through him. So that's what it looks like when a dictator realizes she's out of soldiers. Jenna holstered her radio, eyes on the darkening sky. Oh, she's not done yet. People like her never surrender, they escalate until someone stops them. Mark looked toward the stack of maps on his workbench, then at the blinking red light from the security camera above the garage. "Then it's time we gave the county the show she's been asking for," he said. Because now the game wasn't about letters or law and rules anymore. It was about law, and Mark and Jenna were finally on the right side of it. Sunday morning dawned gray and heavy, clouds hanging low over evergreen lakes like a warning. Mark sat on his porch with a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. The adrenaline from the police visit had faded, leaving behind a bitter, steady anger. He'd expected Corinne to retreat after that embarrassment. Instead, she doubled down. Overnight, new notices had been taped to his mailbox, final warnings with fresh fines for excessive surveillance equipment and public disrespect of HOA authority. Jenna had laughed when she saw them. Mark didn't. It wasn't funny anymore. It was obsession. He was halfway through drafting a letter to the county commissioner when he heard a quiet voice behind the fence. "Mark!" He turned. It was Tom Reynolds, the middle-aged neighbor from 2 houses down, the kind of man who mowed his lawn every Saturday and avoided conflict at all costs. Tom's face looked tense, eyes darting up and down the street. "Tom, everything okay?" Tom hesitated, clutching a small manila envelope. "You didn't get this from me," he whispered, stepping closer. "And if Corinne asks, you never saw me." Mark frowned. "Tom, what are you?" "Just take it," Tom said sharply, pushing the envelope into Mark's hand before glancing around again. "I'm on the board, or I was. I've had enough." Before Mark could respond, Tom turned and walked briskly back toward his house, head down like a man sneaking away from a crime scene. Mark stared at the envelope for a moment, the paper slightly crinkled from Tom's tight grip. Then he went inside and called for Jenna. She came into the kitchen, still wearing her off-duty sweatshirt but with that same investigative sharpness in her eyes. "What's that?" He laid the envelope on the table and opened it carefully. Inside were about a dozen photocopied pages, email printouts, by the look of them. Mark's heart started to race as he read the subject lines. Ray Thompson property, jurisdiction concern. Ray annexation vote unfiled. Ray risk of disclosure. He read the first email aloud. "Corinne, per your question, Lot 42, the Thompsons, was never included in the official annexation documents filed with the county. The prior president attempted to add it during the 2008 revision, but failed to submit the paperwork. Proceeding with fines or enforcement on that property could expose the HOA to liability. Recommend ceasing correspondence immediately. Alan Beck, HOA counsel." Mark looked up at Jenna, his pulse pounding. She knew. He grabbed another email, this one from Corinne herself, sent just 2 months ago. "Alan, I appreciate your concern, but if we don't treat all residents equally, people will start questioning the HOA's authority. The Thompsons have been resistant from the start. If we let them ignore our rules, others will follow. Sometimes people need to be reminded who runs this neighborhood." Jenna's expression darkened. That's it. That's premeditated harassment. She knew she had no legal claim and did it anyway. Mark kept flipping through the pages, his hands trembling with a mix of fury and vindication. There were more messages, threads between Corinne and the board treasurer about quietly absorbing the Thompson property, discussions of retroactive boundary clarification. Even a message noting that, if no one checks the county plat, it'll stay under HOA jurisdiction by default. Jenna leaned forward, scanning one of the copies. She's been fabricating authority. This isn't just misconduct, it's fraud, maybe even extortion if she collected money under false pretenses. Mark sat back in disbelief. Tom must have risked a lot bringing these. He did, Jenna said. And that tells me something. Corinne's losing her grip. The board's turning on her. Mark gathered the papers, carefully placing them into a new folder. Across the top, he wrote in bold marker, "Evidence, fraudulent HOA activity." Jenna opened her laptop and began typing. "I'll draft a report for the county clerk and another for the sheriff's department. If she wants to weaponize law enforcement, she's about to find out what happens when the law fights back." Mark looked toward the window. Across the street, Corinne's blinds twitched, the unmistakable movement of someone watching. He could almost feel her eyes on the house, waiting, listening, desperate to know what he was planning next. He smiled coldly. "You wanted control, Corinne. Now you're going to get all the attention you asked for from lawyers, auditors, and law enforcement." Jenna looked up from her typing. "And when the county gets this?" "She won't just lose her power," Mark said. "She'll lose the entire HOA." He slid the final email back into the envelope, the one with Corinne's name bold at the top, next to her damning line. "The Thompsons can't afford to fight us. They'll comply or leave." Mark's voice hardened. "We're not leaving." He turned off the light and tucked the folder into his briefcase. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin, in offices, not driveways. And this time, the paper trail led straight to her downfall. By Monday morning, the Thompsons were done playing defense. The days of swallowing Corinne's threats and watching her prance around with a clipboard were over. The tide had turned, and now, every smug smile, every bogus fine, every manipulative letter was about to come back to bury her. The kitchen table looked like a war room. Jenna sat with her laptop open, drafting a report with a detective's precision. Beside her, Mark spread the photocopied emails and county documents across the surface, highlighting every line that proved their home was never under HOA jurisdiction. "Everything ties back to her," Mark muttered. "The fake fines, the doctored notices, even the so-called community votes. She's been signing things without board approval." Jenna nodded grimly. "And using HOA funds to cover legal threats that don't exist. I've seen this kind of behavior before. People like Corinne think authority equals immunity." She opened another document on her laptop, the cursor blinking beside a heading that read, "Official complaint, misuse of HOA funds, false reporting, and jurisdictional fraud." Mark leaned closer. "Who gets this?" "Three places," Jenna said. "County Clerk's Office, State HOA Oversight Division, and my department's Economic Crimes Unit. If she's been collecting dues from non-members, it qualifies as financial misconduct." Mark's eyebrows rose. "You're not holding back." "Why should we?" Jenna said flatly. "She tried to weaponize law enforcement against you. She trespassed, falsified records, and intimidated half this street into silence. It's time she sees what real accountability looks like." By noon, they had everything organized: dates, evidence, and witness statements from Tom Reynolds and another quiet ally, a retired judge who'd lived at the edge of the neighborhood for years. Jenna smiled faintly as she read over his note. "The HOA has long overstepped its authority. Mrs. Miller's conduct has been coercive, deceptive, and inconsistent with any legal charter I've ever seen." They printed it and added it to the packet. Mark leaned back in his chair, exhausted but electric with purpose. "Feels weird. We've been reacting for so long, it's nice to finally hit back." Jenna reached for his hand. "This isn't revenge, Mark, it's justice." He nodded, though he couldn't help but smirk. "Feels like both." That afternoon, Jenna drove downtown, her badge clipped neatly to her belt, though she wasn't there on official duty. She met with a contact at the county auditor's office, a quiet, bespectacled man named Craig Porter, who owed her a favor from a prior case. When she slid the evidence folder across his desk, he took one look and frowned. "You're saying the HOA's been collecting dues from properties not under its jurisdiction?" "Worse," Jenna said. "Their president knew it. We've got internal emails and a county map proving it. She's been using those funds to cover legal enforcement costs that don't legally exist." Craig flipped through the pages, whistling under his breath. "This is bad, like state investigation bad." "That's the idea," Jenna said. Meanwhile, back at home, Mark emailed the same packet to the state HOA Oversight Division and uploaded the documents to a secure online complaint portal. It wasn't just a personal battle anymore. It was official. By late afternoon, the first domino fell. Craig called Jenna back. "You didn't hear this from me," he said quietly, "but the county finance office is flagging Evergreen Lakes HOA for an emergency audit. Corinne's about to get visitors." Jenna smiled. "Good, make sure they bring calculators." That evening, Mark and Jenna sat together on the porch as thunder rolled in the distance. Across the street, Corinne's house was lit up. She was packing near her window, phone pressed to her ear, visibly agitated. Mark took a sip of his coffee, watching her silhouette. "Think she knows yet?" "Oh, she knows," Jenna said, her voice low. "Auditors don't knock quietly." As if on cue, two unmarked county sedans rolled slowly into the cul-de-sac, parking in front of Corinne's pristine driveway. Two men and a woman stepped out, briefcases in hand. They flashed badges. Corinne came rushing out in her robe, still clutching her phone. Mark couldn't hear the words, but he saw the panic, the way her voice cracked, the way her hands gestured wildly before one of the officials calmly handed her a stack of papers. "Subpoenas," Jenna murmured. "They move fast when public funds are involved." Mark leaned back in his chair, letting out a long breath. "Feels like watching justice roll downhill." Jenna's lips curled into a thin smile. Gravity always wins. Across the street, Corinne's perfect facade was crumbling, her voice rising, her posture collapsing, her control slipping through her fingers. The queen of Evergreen Lakes was finally cornered. And this time there were no clipboards, no letters, no rules to hide behind. Only the truth, and the people she tried to intimidate holding the receipts. For the first time in months, the street felt quiet, peaceful. Mark looked over at Jenna. "You think this is the end?" She shook her head. "For her, not yet. People like Corinne don't just fall, they implode." Mark smiled faintly, the storm's first drops tapping the railing. "Then let's make sure she does." The night of the meeting arrived like the calm before a storm. Every seat in the Evergreen Lakes Community Hall was filled, neighbors whispering, papers rustling, the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. The air buzzed with anticipation and resentment. Everyone knew something big was about to happen. Corinne Miller, dressed in her usual crisp blazer and pearl earrings, stood at the front of the room behind a wooden podium. She smiled tightly, her composure strained but intact. A banner behind her read, "Evergreen Lakes HOA, United in Order." Mark and Jenna slipped in quietly, taking seats near the back. But it didn't take long before Corinne spotted them. Her smile thinned into a sneer. "Before we begin tonight's agenda," Corinne announced, her voice amplified by the microphone, "I want to address the ongoing issue of noncompliance at 42 Brookstone Drive." Her gaze pierced straight through the crowd toward the Thompsons. "We have done everything by the book, yet some residents seem to believe they're above community standards." A few murmurs rippled through the room. Some nodded in agreement, but others looked uneasy. Jenna leaned forward, whispering, "She's baiting you." Mark didn't move. "I know," he muttered, "not tonight, not this time." Corinne continued, pulling out a stack of printed violation notices and waving them dramatically. Unauthorized tree trimming, unapproved siding color, a shed built without HOA consent, These are clear violations of the bylaws we all agreed to uphold." Mark stood up. His voice was calm but carried weight. "Actually, we didn't agree to anything, because we were never part of your HOA." A hush fell over the room. Karen froze, eyes narrowing. "Excuse me." Mark held up a binder and a rolled county map. "This," he said, walking toward the front, "is the original county survey. Our property was never annexed into Evergreen Lake's jurisdiction. We're not under HOA authority, and you knew that." Gasps spread through the crowd. Karen stammered, "That's ridiculous, fabricated." But before she could finish, Mark gestured to a man sitting by the aisle, an older gentleman with a neatly pressed shirt and a leather folder in hand. "This is Carl DeWitt," Mark announced. "County surveyor, 40 years of service." Carl stepped forward, unrolling the official map on the projector screen. "According to county land records and registered plats," he said clearly, pointing at the shaded boundaries, "the property at 42 Brookstone Drive lies outside the Evergreen Lakes HOA boundary line by approximately 62 feet. Legally, they're independent landowners." A collective murmur spread through the hall, some shocked, others furious. One homeowner stood up. "Karen, is that true? You told us every lot in the phase was under HOA governance." Karen's voice cracked. It was an oversight, just a technicality." Another voice rose from the back. "You fined them for years over something you knew was enforceable." "Misuse of power," someone else shouted. "Where's our money going, Karen?" another demanded. The room was boiling over now. Jenna didn't need to say anything. Her calm police demeanor spoke volumes. She simply crossed her arms, watching as Karen's authority crumbled in real time. Karen tried to regain control, slamming the gavel. "Order, everyone, order." But no one listened. The crowd had turned completely. Mark stood firm at the front, the county survey displayed like a weapon of truth behind him. "For years, you've bullied people with citations, threats, and lies," he said. "That ends tonight. The truth is on record, and soon, so will your misuse of HOA funds." Karen's face went pale. The microphone in her hand trembled. By the time the meeting adjourned, she was surrounded not by supporters, but by angry homeowners demanding audits, refunds, and resignations. Mark and Jenna walked out together into the cool night air, the hall still echoing with raised voices behind them. Jenna smiled faintly. "You handled that better than I could have." Mark exhaled, finally feeling the weight lifting from his chest. "I didn't have to fight her. The truth did that for me." The streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the quiet neighborhood, a neighborhood that, after tonight, would never see Karen Miller the same way again. The days following the town hall were eerily quiet. For the first time in months, Mark woke to birdsong instead of angry emails or notices taped to his door. But beneath the calm, something darker brewed, the kind of silence that comes before a storm breaks in the other direction. Jenna had filed the formal complaint through the county attorney's office. The evidence, the HOA emails, the forged annexation forms, and the misused funds, was now in the hands of investigators. Mark thought it might take weeks before they acted. It took only 3 days. On the 4th morning, an unmarked sedan pulled up in front of the Miller residence. 2 detectives stepped out, one with a clipboard, the other carrying a folder thick with documents. Across the street, neighbors peeked through curtains, whispering as the officers rang Karen's doorbell. Inside his own kitchen, Mark sipped his coffee and watched through the window. Jenna, still in her police training sweats, leaned against the counter, arms folded. "They moved fast," she said quietly. "Guess someone didn't just bend the law," Mark replied. "She snapped it clean in half." Across the street, Karen opened the door. Her hair was disheveled, her usual perfection gone. Her voice carried faintly through the morning air, sharp, defensive. "This is harassment. I'm the HOA president." The detective didn't flinch. He handed her a paper and said something that made her freeze, her face drained of color. Moments later, one officer stepped forward, turning her around gently but firmly. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed faintly across the cul-de-sac. Neighbors gathered now, a small crowd forming. Phones came out. A few recorded, others simply stared in disbelief. "What's going on?" someone asked. "Forgery," another whispered. "They said she forged signatures, even the county clerk." Jenna exhaled slowly, shaking her head. She signed off on fake annexation papers to pull more homes under HOA control. That's a felony. Mark didn't gloat. He didn't smile. Watching Corinne being led down her own driveway, the same one where she'd once confronted him with a clipboard and false authority, was surreal. Justice wasn't supposed to be satisfying, but it was. Corinne turned, catching sight of Mark and Jenna through their window. Her expression twisted, a mix of rage and disbelief. For the first time, she had no control, no rules to hide behind. As the detectives guided her into the back seat, a neighbor shouted, "You made our lives hell for years, Corinne." Another added, "Where's all our money, huh?" The car door closed, the engine started, and just like that, Corinne Miller, the self-proclaimed queen of Evergreen Lakes, was driven away in silence. Later that afternoon, a news van appeared. Reporters filmed the HOA entrance sign, the empty president's parking space, and stacks of complaint forms now part of an active criminal investigation. Jenna received a call from a colleague in the sheriff's office. "You were right," the voice said. "She forged at least 8 annexation forms, even tried to retroactively file one for your property." Jenna nodded, jotting notes. "What happens now?" "She's being charged with forgery, fraud, and misuse of community funds. The DA's office is moving fast. The paper trail is airtight." That evening, as twilight bled across the neighborhood, Mark stepped outside. The air smelled clean, the way it used to before all the letters, threats, and fines. The HOA president's sign had already been taken down. In its place, a simple notice from the county read, "Evergreen Lakes HOA, under audit and pending dissolution." Jenna joined him on the porch, her shoulder brushing his. "Feels different, doesn't it?" "Yeah," Mark said softly, "like the neighborhood can finally breathe." In the distance, porch lights flickered on one by one. For the first time in months, they weren't symbols of surveillance. They were signs of peace returning. But Mark couldn't help thinking. For every Corinne Miller caught, there were dozens more across the country, hiding behind paperwork and power. This one just picked the wrong family to cross. The weeks following Corinne Miller's arrest felt like the air itself had been cleared, as if the constant hum of tension that once hovered over Willow Ridge, no longer Evergreen Lakes, had finally lifted. Gone were the letters, the fines, the clipboard patrols. For the first time in a long while, the neighborhood was quiet, peaceful, human. Mark stood at the end of his driveway one early Saturday morning, a mug of coffee in his hand, watching a group of neighbors repaint the community entrance sign. The old one, Evergreen Lakes HOA, preserving standards since 1998, had been pulled down weeks ago, the once proud wooden board now lying cracked behind the maintenance shed. The new sign gleamed in soft morning light, simple but full of meaning. It read, "Welcome to Willow Ridge, respect over rules." Mark smiled faintly. "Has a nice ring to it," he said to Jenna, who stood beside him, hair pulled back, sleeves rolled up. "Better than the old slogan," she replied. "Compliance is community." That always sounded like a threat. He chuckled. "Yeah, now it actually sounds like a neighborhood, not a military base." After Corinne's arrest, the county dissolved the Evergreen Lakes HOA completely. An interim committee of residents, including some of Corinne's former loyalists, voted to replace it with a voluntary neighborhood association. No fines, no surveillance, no power games. Just people helping each other maintain their homes and sanity. The mood was different now. Neighbors who once whispered behind blinds now waved openly. Families brought out grills for weekend cookouts. Kids rode bikes again without being chased down for noise disturbances. Even the Thompsons' old oak tree, once at the center of Corinne's unauthorized trimming feud, stood proudly trimmed and healthy, draped in sunlight. Inside their home, Mark hung up the thick binder of HOA letters, now neatly labeled "Case Closed," and slid it into a drawer. "Let it stay there," he said. "A reminder of what happens when one person confuses authority with ownership." Jenna looked around the quiet street, arms folded loosely. "You think she'll ever come back?" Mark shook his head. "Maybe, but not here. People like that don't survive in places built on honesty. They need control to breathe." The county eventually held a small press conference confirming the HOA's official dissolution and refund plan. Every homeowner who had been fined unfairly would receive restitution. But the real victory wasn't in the paperwork. It was in the silence. The kind that followed the fall of false power. Weeks later, during the first Willow Ridge block party, Mark watched as laughter filled the street where arguments once echoed. The same sheriff's department that once showed up with compliance orders now came to share lemonade and barbecue. Even the local news covered it. From HOA horror to harmony, how one neighborhood reclaimed itself. Jenna leaned on his shoulder as they watched kids chase each other near the new sign. "You know," she said softly, "that line, respect over rules, you came up with it." He grinned. "Guess I just wanted people to remember that respect can't be voted into bylaws." As the sun dipped behind the maple trees, the neighborhood glowed in amber light. The fences, once symbols of division, now simply marked yards, not boundaries. The only sound was the soft rustle of leaves and the laughter of neighbors who'd finally learned to live without fear of a clipboard. Mark took Jenna's hand. "Think we'll ever see another Corinne Miller?" "Probably," Jenna said with a wry smile. "But next time the community will know better." The wind picked up slightly, carrying the faint scent of cut grass and new beginnings. Above them, the freshly painted sign swayed gently in the breeze, "Welcome to Willow Ridge, respect over rules." For the first time in a long while, it wasn't just a message. It was the truth.